The thing that I personally don't understand is Trump here, because I don't think I think a danger to a society is not someone like, yes, John Bolton is a danger, but someone with no ideology is also a danger because he could kind of just go with the wind based on the current situation. I think we could be looking at a House of Cards situation. When Kevin Spacey was on that show, he was going to lose re-election, and him and his first lady said, "Well, let's start a war." And you might think that's far-fetched, but Trump's internal polling, if they show him down 10 to 15 points to either Biden or Bernie, which currently they're down 10 to 12 points to both, in those states, you don't think he'd try to do a distraction? Just like Bush did the surge in 2004 and called John Kerry, like, you're un-American if you're not with the troops. You can say what you want about John Kerry, it's not my cup of tea, but this is what happened. I remember I was in freshman year of college watching the debate between Kerry and George Bush, and he was just basically gaslighting John Kerry, saying, like, you know, if you're not with the, we don't have time, we can't afford people that aren't with the troops. So I'm concerned because I don't buy that Trump cared that he would kill 150 people. I think Trump is playing, now he's going on Meet the Press. I think he's trying to move a little bit beyond his base, and I think he was trying to look, you know, kind of like, hey, I have a heart here. But I don't think it's beyond reason that we'd start sending in special advisors near Iraq. He just sent 1,500 more to the Middle East. About the Trump
ADC
aspect.
called it a benign military act. Sending troops is benign because they're not shooting bullets yet.
Right.
I mean, it's just propaganda. Well, I think there are two things happening. So this is where we're getting into speculation, right? So we're not entirely sure, but we'll speculate based on some evidence. So the Wall Street Journal just published a report, and of course the Wall Street Journal is Wall Street's journal. It's a conservative paper, and it's sometimes soft on Trump. So, you know, maybe we can be a little skeptical of the story, but I think there's elements of truth. The story shows that Trump is really upset with John Bolton and Pompeo and the Hawks in his administration. Now, I'm not letting him off the hook. He's the one who voluntarily chose them. He surrounded himself by them. But at the same time, it is true that Trump is not a neocon. He's a horrible bigot. He's a horrible racist. He's an idiot. He just has very little on his brain. But he's not a neocon. He campaigned criticizing the Iraq War and the war in Libya. Now, I think part of the reason is he's just stupid, frankly. He's stupid, and he doesn't really get much about foreign policy. So he has surrounded himself by people like John Bolton, who's an extreme war hawk. And as evil as Bolton is, and he's genuinely evil, unlike Trump, he actually is smart. He is a smart guy. He has spent many years, going back to the Bush administration, plotting a way for a war on Iran. He strongly supported the war in Iraq and was a major architect. And anyone interviewing him who doesn't mention that he was an architect of the Iraq War, that is journalistic malpractice. That should be that should be a fireable offense in journalism. It's like this week.
It's a promotable offense.
No, exactly. Well, this week you had corporate media outlets, multiple corporate media outlets, brought on Condoleezza Rice to talk about the so-called Iran threat. They didn't mention in the entire interview that Condoleezza Rice in the Bush administration was an architect of the Iraq War. And of course, she blamed everything on Iran. She said the Iranians are the troublemakers in the Middle East, is her exact quote. Well, similarly, John Bolton gets all these interviews, and they don't mention his past history of lobbying for war in Iran, the fact that he actually has been keynote speakers at this neoconservative group, United Against Nuclear Iran. UANI, United Against Nuclear Iran. So I've been to some of their summits before, and John Bolton was the keynote speaker, and he has been doing this for years, even before he was installed as national security advisor. So he has a long history. Pompeo, of course, was the director of the CIA, another anti-Iran hawk. And as he recently said in an interview at a U.S. military academy, he said, in the CIA, we lied, we cheated, and we stole all the time. We had entire training sessions on it. I mean, he just admits it. So again, we have these morons in the Trump administration who are revealing what U.S. policy has been for many years. So in some ways, it's kind of refreshing, as evil as they are. But so those are the people in the Trump administration, right, who are helping to lead this. And then there's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. According to the Wall Street Journal, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from the military was slightly more moderate and cautious. I actually think that's probably a fair assessment. Not because the people leading the military are great peace doves, not because they cared so much about ending war, obviously not, but because he understood that a war in Iran would be so catastrophic. It could potentially bring in Russia or China, which would be another world war. But not just that, it would lead to millions of deaths. It would be much worse than even the Iraq war, which led to 1 million deaths, because the Iranian military is much stronger, unlike the Iraqi military, which largely buckled because they didn't really have loyalty to Saddam. The Iranian military is much more loyal, has much more morale. During the Iran-Iraq war, 1 million people died in the 1980s, and the U.S. supported Saddam Hussein against Iran in that war, although you never hear the fact that the U.S. supported Saddam when he was carrying out chemical attacks on Iranian and Kurdish civilians, and those chemical weapons were provided who? By the Americans and British, and CIA leaked documents showed that. But anyway, the Iranians in a war, the military is very well trained, well equipped, and has high morale. How are you going to convince 20-year-old Americans to go fight a war in Iran? I mean, imagine...
Because they can't get a job anywhere else.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, imagine the morale of American soldiers fighting. It would be so crazy. And then it could bring in Iraq again. It could bring in Lebanon. It could bring in Syria. It could bring in Yemen. It would be a regional war.
What about Russia?
Well, yeah, Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but just regionally, it's possible it could bring in other nuclear powers like China and Russia, but locally it could bring in other regional powers. So it would just be so catastrophic. So anyway, I actually think it is probably true that elements of the U.S. military leadership are telling Trump, we got to be a little careful here because we can threaten them, but if we get into a war, it would be so catastrophic. And not only would it be bad in terms of the sheer life lost, but you talked about domestic repercussions. You know, you're right that oftentimes presidents will escalate a war to try to win re-election. But the difference is, with the Iraq War, even though the Iraq War had record-level opposition, it was after 9/11. And then the Bush administration could use the threat of terror. Saddam is supposedly linked to Al-Qaeda, which was completely false and fake. WMDs. It's very different today. The Iraq War, as unpopular as it was, him escalating it didn't hurt him. A war in Iran, that would probably actually, even though you have these idiot talking heads on these pundits on TV, even Trump's base would not support a war in Iran. It would be completely catastrophic. I don't think it would help re-election. I think it would hurt him. So I think Trump has recognized that Bolton and Pompeo really want war.
But isn't Trump's base attracted to this tough guy thing Trump's got going on?
Yeah, but at the same time, they like it. I think Trump is what he's doing. My personal opinion this is based on speculation. I think he's doing a kind of good cop, bad cop strategy, right? Mm-hmm. So you have Bolton who's foaming at the mouth for war, and then you have Trump who's saying, look, I'm being very responsible. I'm actually the one who's responding to my military advisors, and I'm not taking things too far because I campaigned promising no new wars, which is true. He campaigned on that. And I think, even though he's an idiot, I think intuitively, he's kind of more like what you would call a paleocon. Someone like Pat Buchanan. Paleoconservatives who are skeptical of war and this whole America First thing. Even though it's racist and ridiculous and nothing in any way justifies that ridiculous chauvinism, the anti-immigrant sentiment, that's ridiculous. It's also part of a larger kind of conservatism that's different from the Bush neoconservatism. Mm-hmm. That is what they would call a muscular conservatism, which just means a warmongering conservatism. Yeah. And the idea is we have to defend democracy and freedom and overthrow dictatorships throughout the world. Trump doesn't care about that. Trump's like...
Unless they're in Saudi Arabia, Colombia.
Exactly. And that's always been hypocritical, but Trump is kind of like Pat Buchanan. And actually, Pat Buchanan was just interviewed on Fox News saying that he thinks this war is a stupid idea. He's going back to this kind of paleoconservatism that says, why are we even fighting abroad? Like, let's forget this. So I think he's playing the good cop. I mean, in this scenario, he's not good. But in the good cop, bad cop scenario, and then Bolton is the bad cop. So compared to Bolton, Trump seems more reasonable. And that's how the far right always works, is that if you're on the far right and you have these crazy policies, you surround yourself with someone even crazier and more extreme, and then their extreme policies, which used to be unheard of, now suddenly seem reasonable. Or now suddenly seem, that's the right, and then your policies seem reasonable. It's the same strategy that the Republican Party used with Bush. So now Bush and John McCain, the neoconservative Republicans, are seen as moderates and have a majority approval among Democratic voters. When John McCain died, he was more popular among Democrats than Republicans.
Oh my God, the Democratic Party was like, oh, this brave man, this patriot.
So the way that works is Bush, who used to be seen rightfully as a far-right figure, because he helped take away a lot of our civil rights. He waged this ridiculous war on terror. Domestically, he attacked, the very few safety net programs we had.
Patriot Active.
Absolutely. But he's now seen as a moderate because Trump went on stage and he normalized ideas that were seen as so extreme because they are extreme.
Mm-hmm.
So then suddenly people like Mitt Romney are portrayed as moderates.
Right.
And I think Trump, to an extent, is doing that with people like John Bolton, who is, again, a mouth-foaming war hawk. So, again, I'm not trying to say that Trump is some kind of dove, but I think he's playing a complex strategy here where, even though he's an idiot, he understands that he can't necessarily wage a direct war on Iran, but he can threaten them and make them seem like the threat and the aggressor, which then allows him to justify the other supposedly non-lethal forms of warfare, like the economic war. So now suddenly, because Iran is supposedly threatening us, which they're not doing, Iran has said many times, we don't want war, but Iran has also said, we're not going to be Iraq. If you wage a war on us, we will defend ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But then the media takes that as proof, oh, they're threatening us with war. No, they're saying that they would defend themselves. So all this is distracting from Trump's actual policies and making him seem like a more moderate figure, which is going to play, I think, into the hands of re-election.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Iran would be as much of a ground war. But in Iraq, we went into Iraq, cowboy guns a-blazing with no strategy on how to get out. And in large part, that's how ISIS was created. It's probably more complicated. But so if we go into war with Iran, that's not exactly like, I don't think they understand that, like, they do it, or maybe they do. You're creating more terrorist groups because it just regenerates. And yeah, if America's going to go around starting wars every decade, you're probably going to create splinter groups and new groups, and that just creates the news cycle, because then you have these terrorist groups that are formed. Of course, I don't defend, two wrongs don't make a right. I don't defend terrorism, but you're going to create more terrorist hate if we go to war with Iran, which hopefully not, but will create attempts on America and be the rationale for future wars.
Well, a few things to respond to that.
I simplified it. It's more complicated.
Yeah. No. There's a lot to respond to, and you made some good points. The first thing is that we have to distinguish Trump from people like Bolton. Again, Trump is an idiot. I think Trump goes a lot with his gut feeling, and he ignores intelligence. And maybe sometimes that's a good thing he ignores intelligence, because I wouldn't trust half the CIA intelligence. But at the same time, he doesn't really, I don't think he gets, for instance, I doubt he knows that Iran is a Shia majority country. And in fact, of all of the people in the world...
It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't even know the difference between Sunni and Shia.
I doubt he knows. I doubt a lot of people in the Trump administration know. Someone like Bolton would know, and Pompeo's kind of stupid too. I mean, you just listen to him speak, he's a moron. But Bolton is smarter. He probably knows, but he doesn't talk about it because the Trump administration is now trying to link Iran to Al-Qaeda, which is so insane because Shia and Iran is kind of theocratic. Again, it is there are elements of democracy and elements of theocracy. And the elements of theocracy are Shia, because it's a Shia majority country. And of all the groups in the world, Shia Muslims are the ones most targeted, attacked, and killed by Al-Qaeda and by ISIS, more than any other group, more than Christians, because there aren't that many Christians in the Middle East, because a lot of them have been ethnically cleansed, more than the Druze minority, which is small, and more than even other Sunni Muslims. And they do kill other Sunni Muslims. Shia mosques are frequently bombed. In fact, if you look at the media reporting on this stuff, they'll be like, Al-Qaeda or ISIS bombs mosque. And then you read like the 5th paragraph and it says a Shia mosque. Almost always. The Hazari minority, all these Shia groups. So the idea that Iran is supporting Al-Qaeda is so insane. Iran has been one of the leading groups fighting Al-Qaeda. Meanwhile, we have a lot of reporting in mainstream corporate media showing that the U.S., the UK, who support the Saudi and Emirati forces in Yemen, are actually paying and working in alliance with Al Qaeda inside Yemen to fight against the Houthis, who are Shia. They're like an unorthodox Shia group. So part of this whole, you might have heard the Shiite Crescent, which is this ridiculous kind of sectarian talking point.
Oh, I thought that was a meal I had at Panera.
Exactly. it's like one of those mooncakes. The Shiite Crescent. It's a mooncake.
Yeah.
No, but like, so the Shiite Crescent they refer to would be the crescent of Iran, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And supposedly it's all under the control of Iran. Well, also Iraq, of course. We're going to mention Iraq. Iraq has a majority Shia country as well. So the idea that Iran would support any of these groups would be linked to them is crazy. As an example of this, ISIS attacked Iran near the parliament, the Majlis, and ISIS had a suicide bomb attack in Tehran. And after the attack, Dana Rohrabacher, you might remember, was a really weird far-right Republican in the Congress. He actually said in a congressional hearing, he said, oh, well, you know, if they're attacking Iran, we should support them. I don't care who they are, we should just support them. And then the people talking to him were like, wait, Rohrabacher, you know we're talking about ISIS. But that moment right there shows the mentality of many people, these neocons, the kind of hawks in the U.S. government, even before Trump and during the Bush administration. In some places, they use the threat of Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda poses a threat to the domestic population, not really to us across the ocean. It does pose a threat to Shia, even to Sunni Muslims who are not extremists, who want to live in a secular state. So they use the threat of Al-Qaeda in some countries to justify war.
Well, wouldn't people say Al-Qaeda does pose a domestic threat to us because of 9/11?
Well, yeah, but I mean, outside of 9/11, what other attacks have... I mean, I'm not disputing the fact that some Al-Qaeda affiliates do want to attack Americans, of course, but it's the 99+% of their attacks are against people in the region.
Right.
And all I'm saying is that Al-Qaeda absolutely poses a threat, but we should not fall into the war on terror rhetoric. Al-Qaeda is not under a bed. Al-Qaeda is not going to attack us. The 9/11 attack...
That's Putin.
Exactly. I mean, the 9/11 attacks were horrific. They were also unique and singular, and we have not had anything similar since. There have been some...
And by the way, stoppable, which is a whole other story.
Absolutely. And Saudi Arabia has its hands all over it, and the CIA... We now know, I would recommend my colleague Max Blumenthal has an incredible book out called The Management of Savagery, how the U.S. national security state helped create Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Donald Trump. And he talks about how elements of the CIA, which were recruiting Al-Qaeda after the war in Afghanistan, where the U.S. supported the proto-Al-Qaeda groups that became Al-Qaeda, they were fighting the Soviet Union, and then in Sudan and Egypt and these other countries, the U.S. was recruiting a lot of these Salafi jihadist Al-Qaeda groups because they were fighting against Iran, fighting against Iraq, fighting against the U.S. enemies, fighting against Russia and Chechnya. So there's a long history of the CIA recruiting these assets, and then the FBI locally is like, well, we're going to crack down these extremists. And then the CIA intervenes and says, no, don't go against them. And that's exactly what happened with 9/11. It was entirely preventable in many ways, but that's a whole long story. The point is that the actual scandal it was not an inside job. It was much more scandalous. It could have been prevented, and intelligence agencies and multiple governments, including evil, scary governments like Russia, Putin himself warned that they had intercepted intelligence that there was going to be an attack, but the CIA considered Al-Qaeda to be such a valuable asset, and that it actually fought other elements of the intelligence community, and there was an internal struggle, and then the attacks. So it's actually really scandalous, and we still have not dealt with the actual scandal. That it was not an inside job. It was actually much worse. It was a reflection of the extreme incompetence of the intelligence community and the Bush administration, and the fact that they were actually preferring to ally with Al-Qaeda in some countries over their own domestic national security. So the war on terror from day one has always threatened our national security much more than it has protected our national security, which is why today in Yemen, after nearly 20 years after the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. is supporting Al-Qaeda in Yemen after arming Al-Qaeda in Syria for the past 8 years. So anyway, the point is that where does Iran fit into all of this? Iran has been one of the forces fighting against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Iran played a key role with the Syrian government in Russia in fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Iran also helped the Iraqi government fight ISIS in Iraq. Meanwhile, the U.S. was supporting many of these so-called rebel groups that either were allied with or defected to ISIS and Al-Qaeda and brought along their U.S. weapons and their U.S. training with them. So there's a lot to say in response to the original point you made, but the thing is, a U.S. war on Iran would not necessarily lead to the rise of terrorist groups like that, because Iran is a Shia majority country and those kinds of Salafi jihadi groups kill Shia. But we should also keep in mind that there are some Sunni minority groups in Iran, and let's be clear, 99+% of Sunnis are not extremists. They're moderate people who hate extremists who are also targeted by extremists. But there's a small, like with any religion, there's a small percentage of extremists, and it's true that the CIA and the U.S. national security state has a history of weaponizing those forces in places like Iran. So recently, last year, there was a bombing attack on an Iranian military parade carried out by someone from the Sunni minority. And again, I'm not saying that because they're Sunni, they're extremists, but because that minority is there are extremists in the minority who hate the Iranian government because it's Shia, and they carried out a suicide bombing attack in the region of Ahvaz against this military parade, and they killed multiple civilians. And then the leader of the group, who was in Europe, in Denmark, went on TV and said, "Yeah, that was us. We're taking credit for it." So a lot of these terrorist groups that have been killing civilians have a lot of links to Western intelligence services because they think the enemy of the enemy is their friend. These groups want to attack Iran. They want to attack Shia, and in the case of the U.S., they think that's a good thing. So there's so much we could talk about there. The war in Iraq did help give birth to many of these groups, but the war in Iran would just be, it's not like anything we have gone through. It would be so crazy. If they do it, it would be such a crime, it would be hard to imagine. It would lead to so many deaths, which is why it's so important that we have people like Bernie Sanders, also Tulsi Gabbard, Mike Gravel, who you interviewed. It's so important that we have these people speaking out against the possibility of a war, because, again, like, it would make the Iraq war look like child's play.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statusquo.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statusquo.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.